Some people find gemstone setting really intimidating, and I will agree it can be incredibly intimidating, especially when you have somebody else's gem that's expensive or irreplaceable because it's a family thing. But it can also be really satisfying. And in my own designs, when I'm using my own gems and I have that freedom of material and freedom of kind of creativity, I really have a lot of satisfaction from it, especially hammer setting. I love hammer setting and just working the metal through the process and to get it to do what I want it to do. There are some principles that really just apply across the board to anything you're trying to set, and it's about angles, it's about pressure, it's about relieving your metal and fitting the stones. So if you kind of think of that, you can work through most of your problems. You have a gemstone. Let's say you have something that profiles similar to a diamond. Okay. And so when somebody says it's diamond cut or diamond in proportion, it means that this, mostly what it means is these facets that go from the girdle, which is your widest point of the stone, to the culet, which is your apex. This is the pavilion. So these pavilion facets make a nice straight line. Sometimes gems come with what we call a native cut, and that line from your girdle to your culet is not straight. It might be curved and have what we call a belly. And there's reasons that the stones are cut like that is to preserve carat weight, so they can sell them for more, or to preserve color because they need more body of the stone to look through. Or maybe there's a zone of color that is preserved by cutting it this way, but these are more difficult to set because this big belly has to be accommodated for in your metal. But a diamond set stone, let's talk about that a little more, is an easier thing to set in general. So I'm going to kind of refer to that. When you are putting it in your metal, you want to try to seat the stone snugly. If you have a lot of slop in your seat when you cut it, that's called overcutting. You're going to create problems for yourself. So if you have your seat, you cut it and it looks like this, but your stone, it looks like this, and it's sitting like that, for example, and maybe the girdle is not fitting into what you cut as a seat, and this pavilion area here is kind of resting on a corner of your bearing. You're going to put a lot of pressure on your stone when this part comes over, and potentially you could break your stone, or you'll never get it to seat tightly. It'll rock, and you'll just have no end of troubles there. So an concept is to match your seat or your bearing angles to the angles of your stone. If you had this nice roundy native cut, then when you cut this seat, you're going to want to use a ball burr, give yourself that depth and possibly that curve, so that when the stone sits in there, that curve will be matched. You can't put this stone in this seat and expect good results. So, and that goes whether it's a wall of a bezel, or if it's a seat on a prong, or something you're cutting into a channel. Wherever a gemstone girdle has to sit, it needs to get some support. It needs to be fairly snug, and that will avoid problems with stone tightening and potential breakage and just lots of frustrations. So that goes to the tool you choose to cut your seed. There's burrs that have, angles, like this. There's burrs that are much flatter like that. There's burrs that are much steeper. There's burrs that have a straight wall that comes down like that. There's all these different shapes, and they do different things. Sometimes you want to undercut, So you would use something with this nice angle so you can undercut a wall or a prong. Sometimes you don't want to undercut, you want to come straight down. So you'd use a burr with a straight side. If you're trying to relieve for a rounded belly, you'd probably come in with some sort of a ball burr. After you've cut a regular angled seat, you might come in with a ball burr and round that out and groove it out. So you can do a lot of things to modify your seat once you get an initial seat cut, and these burr selections are super important. So consider that. Match your angles and match tool angles to stone angles. If you don't have the right angle in a tool, then you'll do it a different way. You'll come in and cut something and then modify it with more cutting or cutting directionally, a lot of things, but you're always trying to get something that fits and gives you security seating of your stone. So I have a bezel wall, and maybe it's kind of thick, or a tube setting or something. Here in cross section I've got a seat, and I've got, okay, there's that, and then along comes a nice gemstone, and I've matched that seat pretty well here for where the girdle hits it, and here's my table, my culet's down here. Okay, so I'm pretty matched here. I've got a good seat here, nicely supported. I have lots of material up here from here to set with. That's important. If you start with too short a material, you're just going to run into problems getting your stone to seat adequately. And when this material bends over, it seems to always be shorter than you thought it was. So give yourself enough room. You don't want too much because you don't want to cover that much of the stone. Ideally, they say something like a third. If you took this area and divided it into thirds, you want your prong to come a third of the way up, something like that. So when this is finished, ultimately, this prong will get bent over, and oh my gosh, crap erasers. Okay. Well, so essentially you'd have it come up and cover, let's do it that way so you can see, a third of the distance from your table to your girdle. And then you go in and you'd round it and you'd finish it and do all these nice things. But you can see where you need some material here to get from here down to here. That bend actually kind of takes up some of your material. So, but how do you get it from here to here? That's a great question. And it has to do with angles. In a prong or something, you might come in with a plier and push that over. I'm going to talk about how you would do it with a hammer and a pressure extensor or a tool, and those angles you might want to use. So let's say you've got this again. We're going to draw it here nice and big, and here's the wall of your bezel, and here's your gem right there. Okay, actually that's a terrible girdle. You want, hopefully your girdle has a little bit of thickness to it. If you have a thin girdle, you're likely to get more breakage. So okay, there's your table, here's your culet, there's your girdle. Now leave this not super tall, but at least halfway up, so maybe there, because when it bends over it'll get a little shorter, and you can always trim it back. I would come in, if I was going to hammer this stone in place, first of all I would want to, if my girdle was like this, it has a little thickness to it, and even if it doesn't, you want to accommodate the girdle. If this just folds over right here at this point, right here, that's going to give an awful lot of pressure on this upper corner of the girdle, and you can break things, especially colored stones. Diamonds can break as well, but colored stones, you got to accommodate that girdle. So you can do a couple things. You can come in and you can take a little burr or ball burr or something and grind out a little extra material in here to accommodate that girdle, so it actually won't get all the pressure of this fold right on it. The other thing sometimes I do is I will come in, if I have an angle right here at the base of the girdle, just above the girdle, right about here, I might come in with a little angled burr, you know, like so, and like, you know, a little burr like that, heart burr I guess they're called, and put another little groove right here. So let's look at that a little closer from here. And I've got, you know, my angle here, and my girdle, say, is a little bit thicker. I'm going to give it a little space so you can see it. It's here. Whoops, that's terrible. Here. And the girdle comes across, and maybe it's got, you know, kind of a thicker girdle here. Put another little groove right there. Why would you do that? Because you're trying to determine where your metal's going to bend. And you want to control that and make it bend where you want. So if your angle is here and you push this bezel over or hammer it over, and it all starts to fold down here, and you've got a girdle that's thicker, you're not accommodating it. So by putting this cut, it doesn't have to be much, just a groove, you're going to encourage bending slightly above that girdle, or right at the girdle top edge. And that will protect that space of the girdle from getting crushed. Not always necessary in small little stones, but in larger stones, anything with a big girdle or an expensive stone or something you're having difficulty fitting, you know, consider your girdle and accommodate it. It's super important that you do that. So you're going to come in and you're going to try to bend this big herky piece of metal. Say you've got a nice thick cast piece and you want to hammer this bezel over it. Well, that's a lot of metal. It's not going to move very well. Even with this little cut here, it may not do what you want. So first of all, I would make sure that it's not too tall. Take it down a little bit and go back up here to this one. And then secondly, I tend to, if it's a thick bezel, file a little bevel on it, so that now I've taken away this corner, right? And I've created two things. One thing is a space for my tool to hit nicely right here, and then also I've relieved some material and it will start to move better. So then what do you do? Where do you hit this material if you're going to try to set your stone? You don't hit straight down at first. I tend to come in at an angle like this with my tool, try to close any gapping in this direction toward the stone. You might even come in from out here if it looks like you need to close more gap, and put pressure out here, eventually move up to this direction, and then eventually you'll come down from an angle toward the top. But you'll do it in courses. So you'll go around your bezel or your semi-bezel or whatever you're working on with one angle. Another course, you'll come around at a different angle, and then as you get closer to having this prong over here, you'll come down from the top angle in another course. That's how I approach it, sequential angles. Now, if you've relieved some material and you're not getting your bezel to move properly, you have to change something. So what do you change? I've been in situations where I was in one room and I heard another jeweler tapping and setting a stone and tapping and tapping and tapping, and the tapping went on for, I don't know, 20 minutes, and it sounded like she was just tapping the same way the whole time. So clearly something wasn't working. You don't need to tap the same way for 20 minutes. It became clear that she wasn't effectively moving her metal as she wished, and by continuing to tap without changing anything, she wasn't getting her stone set. And what she needed to do, as it turned out, was relieve some material. She had too much material. It wasn't moving. it was getting work hardened. You have a window of opportunity in setting where your material is the most malleable, and that's your initial working of it. As you work it, especially if it was white gold, you would be hardening it and making it more difficult to move. So sometimes I go in even after I've been setting for a while with a file, typically a file, and I will remove more material as needed so that I get rid of all that and make this area that needs to go over the stone more responsive to my blows, so to speak. I've thinned it, I've taken away some of the hardened metal, and then I can get it to move better. So relieve some material, change your angle, go back to this angle. Perhaps you need to come more from a top angle. But you have to change something. Change how hard you hit. Don't keep tapping. Try a more direct blow. Perhaps whatever is holding your piece isn't snug enough and you're losing a lot of your power of your strike into the vise that's holding the piece. And you can hear the difference. If it's tight, you'll get a nice kind of thud. If it's loose, you'll get sort of a rattly bang. You know, listen to those things. Tighten up your piece. To get the power transmission where you want it and how you want it by relieving metal, changing angles, keeping your piece tight, making sure you have relief around your girdle, getting things to bend where you want. Okay, here's a caveat. Caveat. So if you have, we'll stick with our diamond shape. Here's your gem. Okay, here's your bezel wall or whatever it is, and you've been hitting it along nicely, and you've got things going pretty good, and you've got this prong down, and you've got it kind of going like that, and so you've got it mostly down. You've got a little bit of space here, right in here, that you still want to cover, because you can't leave prong tips up. They catch on threads and jackets and things like that. They snag things, and then your stone's not secure anyway. So you want to come down with your prong. First of all, I would thin that out a little again. Right here, maybe take off a little like this. So that means this tip right here, which isn't pointy hopefully, will have less material, and it will want to bend a little bit. And don't take off too much material at a time, but if you need to take off a little material, do so. Then you're going to come down this way. Well, a cardinal rule of setting is never let your tool hit your stone. Like if you slip and your tool clatters across the top, you can scratch it or chip these facet junctions here and all that. So another thing you might end up doing is bring your tool is here, you're striking it here, and what if it overlaps a little too far this way and you're hitting it and it's coming down this way? So that tool can never extend past the prong, and you risk chipping that stone there. So move the whole operation this direction, get that tool back over here, get rid of this possibility, and then keep your stone safe. So that's, you really got to watch that. No matter where you're coming from, do not let your tool, whether it's plier, hammer, pressure extensor, anything, hit your gemstone. Sometimes I put tape. I'll put some scotch tape or masking tape if it's a big enough stone right over the whole shebang, and then I can protect from some of that incidental. Even a rubberized abrasives in your flexible shaft, sanding discs, even things that are labeled stone safe, they can all actually do damage to your stone, and these facet junctions especially, so don't trust it. Just try to avoid it. When using files, use a polished edge barrette file or something to minimize that potential. So those are some of my thoughts on stone setting. I hope that it's more clarifying than muddling, but you know, I do a lot of stone setting, a lot of what you'd call creative stone setting, where the gemstones are integrated into the pieces, and it's not a clear-cut, well-defined setting situation. So you could go along with, I've had people I've worked with that they could set 100 to 150 diamonds a day. And that's because they're using calibrated stones and pre-made settings, and the stones fit right in. They've got burrs that are the right size. They can just go boop, boop, boo, doo, doo, and, you know, in 10 minutes, 5 minutes a gem, they're just, you know, setting all these little diamonds. Well, that's not what this type of setting is. This is not, oh, everything matches, everything's perfect, just do it. This is, heck, I can't seem to get my stone to sit. My wall's too thick. My channel's too wide. My, you know, channel's too narrow. My, I can't get my tool in there. I can't get the stone to stop rocking. Problems aplenty. And that happens when you're, you know, making things and you're trying something new, or you don't understand completely what needed to happen in your preparation. But you figure it out, and these are some of the tools to help figure it out. So we'll move on. Make sure it's straight, as level as you can muster. Okay, looking good. I'm going to use the same plier technique here. Slow, not too much at a time, because one end will go wonky on you. I think this prong is too thick over here. Let's get rid of some of it. If you can't get in with a file, get in with a sanding disc or something. Just try to not mar anything up you don't want marred up. Okay. It's just a really thick little prong there, isn't it? So let's see, let's get rid of some more of this. Take some more off over here. Stone's tacked in place though pretty well, obviously, or it would be falling out. So carefully go back in and push a little more on the other side. Okay, I could come in from over here probably. That's probably a better angle. Let's try this. Use your leather and protect your ring. I'm not, because it's easier for you to see. Now you can see where it's starting to do a compound bend, where I did that little scoring with my blade. There. Okay, so I'm getting a little bending up above the girdle. That's good. That's what I want. It's at the girdle and it's above. It's like a bending in two places. So I'm going to come in again and continue to hold it steady. Yes, this is an outside prong. I want it to be nice and sturdy out here. Okay, I'm going to look at it with my loupe and I can see what's happening. What do I want to have happen here? This one can come down more. I'm going to thin it and bring it down. This one, guess what? Come in and give it actually another little cut, a little bit lower than my original cut. Carefully, don't scratch your stone. Check for level, straight. I'm going to come in and relieve both prongs a little more. You can see here, I'm going to just file off the back side a little more. Okay, gonna file off this one a little bit more. Like I said, if you were setting 50 diamonds all the same size and shape in a pre-manufactured channel or prong setting, you could do this zip, zip, zip. Colored stones are different, and specialty colored stones are really different. They're not replaceable, they are touchy, they're fragile. You gotta be careful. Okay, we're gonna try this again. I'm gonna come in with my other jaw up. I'm looking at profile, and if you really want to see what's happening, which I do actually quite a bit, put something white behind. Okay, now you can see in profile what you're dealing with. What have you got going on here? How much space is there around this prong and between the stone and the prong? Take this away. That's harder to see. It's really hard to see what you're doing. Use some white behind you and you can get that in much sharper relief. Then you can see where the gold is going. Let's try it carefully. Can you see that? Can you see that prong going down nicely where it's supposed to? It's looking good. So these just need a lot of trimming up and kind of finessing. Let's put that last one in. I'm going to do a little hammer setting, and I'm going to use this vise. It's just a hardware store vise. You can use a more official GRS system. You can use a graver's block. You can do whatever you like. The main thing is hold it securely. Create a place where you can hammer and not get a bunch of bounce and reverb. You want your pressure to go right into where you want it to go. So obviously you're going to protect your material. My way with this vise would be to take that same little piece of leather and put it in. Tighten it down a little. I'm going to be setting this pink garnet, so I'm going to put that on my right side in this case, and then before I tighten that down, I'm going to take something to support the ring. If you just hammer and hammer on the top of this ring, you could distort or bend the shank depending on how thick it is. Plus, I don't want to reef down on this shank. I've got these open work sides. I could totally squish them. Don't want to do that. I've got my ring secured. I've got the wood supporting right under the stone where I'm going to be hammering so I don't distort it. I'm not crushing my ring shank where it's split. I've got leather protecting it. I've got my vise torqued down so that it's not going to move. I'm going to use a chasing hammer. I'm going to use my loop to check things. I've got my tweezers at the ready. Now, I have a variety of little things I hammer with. They are mostly the ends of various files that I have cut off and made little what you call pressure extensors or setting tools. These all have little ends, rectangular, round, different angles to get pressure right where you want it. The smaller the tool, the more concentrated the pressure. This piece is a lot bigger than this piece here in terms of the end of the setting tool, so you're going to have a lot more pressure per square millimeter on this piece than you would with this tool. But they all do different things. This one leaves a lot more tool marks in a little spot. This will leave fewer tool marks because it's a flat surface coming around a curve. I know that the stone is where I want it. Double check your table, orientation, all that. And I'm going to come in and use my finger as a guide. And I'm resting the tool against my second finger there. This is a little curving semi-bezel, okay? So typically I would come in and do a corner and then come and do another corner and kind of tack the stone in place. If the stone bounces around when you do this, then stop and add a little more wax or reposition in that manner. Okay, semi-bezel setting, here we come. Now I've relieved the material nicely, so this is responding well. You notice I'm not coming straight down, I'm coming from an angle. So my first strikes will be coming from an angle. Now I can hear from that sound that this is not quite tight enough. I don't want to over tighten because I know that I've got those split sides I don't want to crush. So okay, can you see the corners coming in pretty well? Now I'm going to make sure the stone is seated. I'm going to go across the arc of the semi-bezel. I'm pushing against, I'm using force with my thumb against my other two fingers so that this tool doesn't slip and go beep right across my stone. That's a bad idea. That's how you break stones. Never hit the stone with your tools. You'll tend to do far better that way. So I'm still coming in from an outer angle, just tapping it down. It's going well. Now I'm going to change my angle. I'm coming a little more in at a steeper angle now. So try to get that top edge to start to go over the stone. Doesn't take a lot of force because I've prepared the thickness of the wall well. I like it. Take your loop, check it. I can see my one corner is down more than the other corner. Check and see if your stone's getting tight. Okay, this stone is actually pretty tight, which means you do not want to continue to put a lot of force on the stone from out at this angle, because then you're just compressing against the girdle, which is already tight. What is not covered is the top of the stone. There's a lot of gap in between the edge of the gold and the stone. That's where we want to now carefully try to get that gold to come down and meet the stone, or very nearly meet the stone. So I'm coming straight down and trying to, in fact, I'm coming a little more than straight down to try to get that gap to close up. Be mindful, this is a garnet, not a diamond. Little taps are good. Yeah. One thing you can do, even while it's in your vise, if you feel like one side isn't responding the same as the other, and maybe you're looking and seeing, oh, it's a little thicker over here. Gosh, I should make it match and make the wall a little thinner. Take your file right there in the setting and carefully, without hitting your stone, reshape that. And I'm just taking off a little bit of the upper outside corner of this wall and putting a little bevel on there and just gently reshaping it. That's going to make that metal move better right there too. It's just kind of thinned it and reshaped it. That's pretty good. So if you can see it, my metal's almost right down over the top of that stone. You don't want to over tighten stones. That's when they break and crack, but you do want to get the metal as close as you can. I'm using optivisors. It's a nice tight stone, and it's not over tight. And I could see where I could go just a little. It's a judgment call. I'm going to take just a little more material off here, up on that outer corner. Now I'm almost pushing at this angle. I'm exaggerating, but I'm going to come in this almost pointing away from the stone, but at that inner edge to try to get a little more contact. Now this is a bit clumsy for that job, so let's go to something a little smaller of a head that I can see the edge of the tool better, so I don't hit the stone with the edge of the tool. I couldn't see it with the other tool very well. It's a little obscured. Then I'm going to just tidy up. You can kind of go along and planish with your tool and take out some of those tool marks too. Just ever so carefully. I like it. Okay, that's exactly what I'm going to do with all of the other stones in here. To the ring. I'm going to take some off. Got to think about why something's not moving. Don't just keep hitting it, and then I'll be able to move it a little closer. The gold is just not quite wanting to move. We're going to make it move, make it do our bidding. Created a facet right in here. That's going to, it's relieved it enough so that it'll move a little more than it did before. And then I'm going to come in here, right up here, close to the wall where the pearl is. I'm going to just try to get that to make sure it's in the, see, I felt like it was a little loose. I can hear the sound. Well, that's better. You can hear it's not as tinny. Okay, I'm going to come in and there's a little more force there. Ha! We have a tight stone. Okay, yay! And we know this one, that one's hair loose. Let's just go in and fix that guy up. When a semi-bezel is loose, make sure you focus on those corners, because that's where the pressure is going to do the most tightening on either end of your arc. I think that we've got everything tight. Woo! What a job, huh? But fun. I love setting stones. I like hammer setting stones. There's a lot of control. You can control things. You can really just manipulate the movement. It's very minute, but you can really have a lot of control when you are hammer setting things. So now all we have to do is a lot of cleanup of tool marks and file marks and stuff like that. So you go in with files, gravers, rubber wheels. Do not hit your stone. Even with rubber wheels, the abrasives can absolutely scratch your garnets, and then you won't be happy. Just go in and clean it all up, and then we'll come back after the ring's completely cleaned up and we'll set the pearl. This pearl has, if you put it in there, you get it just so, and you try to rock it, there's very little rock. See, I've got it seated. If it was moving back and forth, like, you know, you want to try to take away all the parts underneath that are letting it slide, all the high points. So I did mostly that. I've also gone in and I took a ball burr and I put a little groove in each prong, right in there. You see the little groove there, approximately where I want that prong to bend. The other thing I did with all of these is I went in with a larger ball burr, maybe like this, and I went in and I pre-curved the inside of each of these prongs a little bit. We're not going over an angular girdle, you know, with a nice angle, right angle or something like that. We're going over a roundy, undulating organic surface. And it's a pearl. It's soft. It's like a shell. You could crunch it. You could do a lot of things with it. You can scratch it really easily with any tool or abrasive wheel you have. So I want to give it a good chance to not let any of that happen to it. Oh, the other thing is, remember, on this pearl, I chose this pearl and created a setting that would hide the drill holes. You don't have to have pristine pearls to make beautiful things. You can use pre-drilled pearls, half-drilled, hole-drilled, as long as you do a setting that hides those holes. So the way I have this to go in, this tab hides that hole, and this tab hides that hole. Okay, I'm using a plier that has a half round on one side and a flat on the other side so that I don't mar up the prong. I'm going to just go and carefully pull it in a little. Look at the angle, that's good. And take some little strips of tape and tape this pearl into where you want it, and that's going to hold it in place a little bit, and it's going to give a little bit of protection in case you slip. Pearls have some forgiveness depending on the pearl. You can polish out some types of damage if you're careful, and on a freshwater pearl with an undulating surface like this, you might get away with a lot of repair work, but let's avoid the repair work. Just like tightening lug nuts or torquing down a head, that's in a vehicle, of course. You want to just go from side to side, back and forth, and not over tighten one side, or you'll get everything to be tilted. Let's see, I might come across, okay, there, that's what we have to do on this one. I'm going to come across in this manner. I don't need to protect anything because I'm going from prong to prong. It's very easy to slip though, so do be careful. But this is the kind of pressure I need right here to pull that prong down. Did you see that move? Yes. Let's try this. No, that's going to be a little dangerous with those pliers. They're not broad enough. Since I don't have a pair of pliers quite big enough to get across and do what I want to do, I'm going to go back over to my hammer setting. I'm going to come fairly straight down on these prongs too, the ones that are pre-bent. Well, whatever I need. This one has to come in a little bit from the outer angle. And now it's starting to curve. Okay, coming. Oh, that's coming in nice. You can see that one go well. Okay, just go around and work it down, checking your clearance on these prongs. You do not want to smash your pearl. Got some room. If you've pre-shaped the prongs to kind of match the curve of your pearl, you should do okay. If you get to a point where you need to reshape something, do so. Now, since I didn't use the pliers, I'm going to take this tape off so I can see what I'm doing. That pearl is tight. Now, what we want to see is if we have contact. Yeah, you don't want anything that's going to catch on sweaters and stuff like that. So, and we'll detail the ends of these. You can see we're not quite there, but by pre-shaping these prongs to match, at least approximate the curve of the pearl, and by giving them a little relief with a ball burr, they are going where I want them to go. Yeah, okay, well, that is really good. Now all you have to do is go in and kind of detail those prongs a little bit, and at the tips, make sure that you don't have daylight in there, and go in and re-detail the whole thing, and this ring is done. Design-wise, don't be afraid of doing things just because you don't know how to set the stones. You just have to figure it out. You use basic principles, and you can set anything. These prongs are sturdy. They're going to act as bumpers or buffers to the pearl, and a freshwater pearl actually can take quite a bit of wear. I'm really happy with this. It's wearable. It's got beautiful, luscious colors and work. I did run into problems here, as you might recall, on this corner. right here, I had that area coming down in a curve right here, and over here and up here is the pearl, and this is where the channels are for the, and this and then it comes off here. This curve right here was not going to move for me. It was too much material to the way I set these stones in. It just, I should have done it differently in the wax. I didn't. So now I had to figure out how to get the metal over this edge. It was undercut to some degree, but still I was having trouble getting it tight. So I actually came in and took a lot of material away right here after I was trying to set the stone. And so that created this little area here, which is more of an angle. And then that made it able to have thinner material here and more able to get over the stones. So in the middle of setting, I made a design change. That's not a problem at all. You just make it work. So that meant I had to reblend and sort of re-angle things, but it works just fine. But that also made it possible to continue with my setting idea. Wow, this one I really love how it came out too. Look at this. Those beautiful tourmalines that go from the dark green up to that beautiful clear. So they were a bicolor crystal, and when they were cut, they kept the bicolor in the finished gemstone. So that looks really pretty going up to this princess diamond. Over here, I used a little round diamond and put it in a princess setting, so it looks like a princess basically. The biggest challenge on something like this is really, and I succeeded pretty well. I won't say it's perfect, but this was a super big challenge, getting everything straight, parallel, and level. But if you're going to plan something that has a real challenge, like a layout of parallel lines and squares and things that really, if one of them's off, you're going to compromise your whole thing. Think carefully about that, because you'll struggle. And I struggled. I had to reseat a couple of these and give them a little nudge and get them back to straight. Careful finesse with these tabs, these square end prongs on the tourmalines, getting everything to seat down. It's built like a tank. It would be a great everyday ring except for the nature of the gems themselves. And so the edges, the girdles of those baguettes are fragile. So if you were going to sell this, you would tell someone, say, don't wear this in the garden, for gosh sake. Feel across. It does have more protruding areas where these prongs are, but you don't want anything sharp or scrapey. You can feel them, but I've tried to really round down all the corners and finish it well. I love how this ring came out. I ran into some problems both in executing the designs and in setting the stones, but as I hit each problem, I tried to figure out how am I going to solve it. And one of the things that I hope people take away is that there's usually a solution, but step through things carefully, go through the steps that prepare you for the next steps, especially when it comes to stone setting. Make sure that you really are there, that you're detailed, that areas that are going to be hard to get to or potentially damaging to another area are completely detailed and finished before you get into your stone setting. That's the last thing you do. And then go forward and try it, and if you run into problems, think about it. What can I do to change this? If you have a problem, you have to change something. If you're sitting there and tapping and your metal doesn't move, or pushing and pushing and it doesn't move, usually you need to change an angle, remove some metal. Sometimes you have to take your stone out and start over and make your seat better, fill it in with solder and recut it. That happens. Set your little stones and your diamonds first, and the riskiest, most expensive stuff last, so that if you have to backtrack and fix a step, you're not screwed. I mean, honestly, these things happen, but if you take care with each step, you can usually work through it and get there. Think through the problems and come up with a solution. That's how I learn most of what I do. And I'm not saying it's the way everyone does it, because I doubt that it is the way everyone does it. But it is what I've learned and taught myself, and generally I get through these things. So, okay, keep on creating.